Welcome back to another edition of Choice Cuts. I'm your host, Ryan Turek, the managing editor of ShockTillYouDrop.com, and today we're going to be talking about home invasion films. And to talk about this subgenre that I personally love, I brought on these lovely guests. Devin Faraci from Badass Digest. How are you, Devin?
Hi, Ryan.
How's it going?
Pretty
I
good.
love these intros. Evan Dixon from Bloody Disgusting, and critic Todd Gilchrist.
Hi.
Todd, do you have a home you want to pimp out?
Well, I write for Comic Book Resources and just started writing for The Wrap. So.
Very cool. Now, guys, I just want to get your feelings first off on the home invasion subgenre. I mean, it's one that's always endured. I mean, ever since the 60s and 70s. Are you guys big fans of it? Devin, we'll start down the line.
It's one of those genres that I think is really execution dependent.
Yeah.
It can be super tedious, like it can be just the worst crap to sit through, but it can be really great. I think Your Next is one of the better examples of the genre. They do it really well, and it's funny because this year The Purge was one of the worst examples of the genre. It was absolute garbage. So I think it really depends on who's doing it.
Yeah, Evan?
I tend to agree. I think that there's so many subgenres in horror that are all of them are heavily saturated that it really is just what is a good movie, you know.
Todd?
Yeah, well, I sort of third that, in that I feel like the ones that are the most interesting are the ones that actually use that as an idea with something to say, as opposed to just sort of and think about what they're saying before they actually do it, which is again why The Purge is not a great movie, because it does have something to say, but it doesn't think about what it actually has to say before.
Right. Evan, do you think that now that The Purge has come out and Your Next is on the way, regardless of how it performs, do you think that eventually the home invasion subgenre is going to kind of peter out for another year or two?
I mean, it depends on when. I'm sure it will at some point. But again, I just think that like if a good movie comes along, that'll crest the wave a little bit. If Your Next is a success, I would imagine that a lot more get put in the pipeline just because they're so inexpensive to make, or relatively inexpensive to make. Like 98% of them will be terrible, and no one will see 98% of them, and hopefully the good ones rise to the top.
Have you guys seen anything on the direct-to-DVD market or VOD market that actually transcended the norm of bullshit that we've seen?
In terms of home invasion,
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything that really transcended it. No.
Yeah.
There was one British film that I forget the name of.
You're talking about Cherry Tree Lane?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah. That didn't transcend it for me. I mean, it was an interesting thing. It was sort of like Attack the Block, but like without an understanding
Sort of
of those
Attack
kids.
Your Mom.
Well, no. It takes basically takes. I mean, maybe I'm culturally ignorant of London, but it feels like it takes like a similar socioeconomic status and then just makes them the bad guys because it's easier.
Well, I'm just frustrated because when I saw Cherry Tree Lane, I mean, it did absolutely nothing to transcend the formula. The formula is, here's a nice couple. They've got problems. One might be pregnant. One might have AIDS. One might be dying. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They've got one issue, and then these home invaders come in, and then the father or the mother or whatever, they got to step up and save their lives, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what Cherry Tree Lane was. It was just like, oh, come on, man. It wasn't truthful. And it sucked, too, because I liked that filmmaker, and I liked what he did prior to that. Do you guys ever get tired of it? And do you guys ever get tired with certain subgenres?
Well, I mean, this is one of those subgenres that has some of the best movies of all time in it. I mean, Straw Dogs is a home invasion movie.
Yes, a lot of people forget that.
Yeah,
Home
no,
Alone.
Home Alone
Home
is
Alone is,
a
yes,
home invasion movie.
Skyfall.
In Cold Blood has a home invasion. Skyfall does have a home invasion. So it really is just about the movies. I mean, it's one of those genres where if the movie sucks, it's going to be garbage. And it's like a slasher picture might have sort of a structure that makes it enjoyable, but a home invasion movie that's done poorly is going to always be terrible. It's just boring. But like there are other genres I think that work on the genre elements. Home invasion is not one of those.
Yeah, I think that you're dealing with a subgenre where budget is always a factor in the inception of the project. Okay, it's a single location, so a lot of times you're not dealing with the people who can get the most money for whatever reason. Sometimes they're not competent. Sometimes you're just dealing with lazy filmmaking who feel like, okay, we'll just get everyone in a house and let the cameras roll. So yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't automatically lend itself to great movies, and I've been very, very frustrated by the 3 I've had to watch this year.
I know. Well, it seems like the home invasion subgenre is like a good gateway for fledgling filmmakers, to get in, and they all think that they could do it and pull it off correctly, but sometimes no. When it does work, why? Why does it work for you guys? I mean,
one of my favorite movies, literally of the last decade, horror or not, is Funny Games.
Yeah.
The Haneke remake, and the first time I saw that, I was completely blown away because it entirely deconstructs sort of the conventions of horror as a genre, while at the same time being like a completely compelling story on its own. I think that if you look at, like Straw Dogs, you look at, or other movies that have worked. I mean, generally speaking, they have characters who at least are motivated by something that's remotely believable, like, say, survival.
Well, that's the beauty of the genre, is that it's about detonating the concept of safety. So the idea that you are in your home, which is the most safe place that you can be in, and then somebody comes into it, it's a genre that works really well in times when we're feeling insecure nationally. It's the idea that whether it be about like immigration or whether it be about terrorism or whatever, the idea that we feel safe here, but we don't feel safe here anymore.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
also about the motivation of the assailants as well. I mean, what are they in for?
Right.
Are they there for, either to sexual needs, or is there something in the house? Like Panic Room. Panic Room is a home invasion film that a lot of people forget about. What are some of your favorite home invasion films?
Well, you guys mentioned Panic Room. Funny Games is probably my favorite. If I have to pick one in the genre, I liked You're Next a lot. But certainly Panic Room and Straw Dogs are two films that I really respond strongly to from the first time that I saw them.
I get a lot of shit for liking the Funny Games remake over the original. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly why.
I mean, Michael Pitt has a great performance in that.
All of them are.
Well, it's such a cool movie. I mean, even beyond being a good movie on itself, it's such a cool comment on the concept of remakes. I mean, that's what it's a deeper thing. If you've seen the original Funny Games, then watching the remake has so many layers of meaning on top of it. And Haneke is commenting on that on purpose. So I think people who give you a hard time for that are real assholes.
Thanks.
And particularly at the time at which it was released, that was in a moment when we had sort of reached our saturation point for films where gore and torture and sort of brutality had reached its sort of zenith. And I think that what that movie does so cleverly is it sort of deprives you of the sort of quote unquote satisfaction of watching that kind of brutality, but it forces you to confront sort of the emotional repercussions of all those things. And so, like, particularly for me, sort of like looking at the timeline of horror at that point, when you had movies like Saw and these other movies that were so much about physical abuse inflicted upon people, and you never saw any of it in the movie at all. Like, there's literally nothing that you see, but at the same time, you're confronted by watching these people like react emotionally to the kind of brutality that would normally be the punchline. To me, was something that I thought was not just like sort of fascinating, sort of viscerally, but also like sort of like philosophically or as a thesis for a film.
I do think it's interesting what Devin was saying about 9/11 and the national mood, or if you even said 9/11.
About what temperature steel melts?
Yeah.
We should talk about this.
Many years later, we're still talking.
The national mood, like, of us not feeling safe. I mean, that's sort of one of the only reasons I can think of about the public's response to The Strangers, which is a good home invasion movie.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the best. But it's a really brutal movie that made a surprising amount of money for the content that's in there.
No, that's what it is. I mean, all great horror movies are in some way a reaction to the world around them, whether or not the audience or even the filmmakers understand that. And yeah, post 9/11, home invasion kind of had a bump because of that idea that all of a sudden we felt super secure here in America, and all of a sudden we weren't anymore. My favorite home invasion is Fight for Your Life. Which not many people have seen, which is this weird home invasion movie. It's a black family that gets invaded by a racist white bank robber who just is like the world's biggest asshole, and then is like holding them all hostage in their house, and they fight back, and it's this like great 70s grindhouse movie that is all about black people beating the shit out of white people. You can just imagine like the crowd going nuts, but in that moment it's the same thing. It's hitting this momentary thing in the public consciousness, this post-civil rights movement thing where it's exciting, and all the best horror movies do that, and Home Invasion really does that, I think.
Yeah, but some don't have anything to say, but for some filmmakers, just pure exercise in filmmaking, and being able to, hone their craft, try some new styles. For instance, there's one that I think Aggression Scale is one of them, but one that I watched 2 years ago called Kidnapped, which is a Spanish film. Has nothing new to bring to the table, but utilize split screen to ratchet up tension. And it's like 90 minutes of just women screaming and crying. I mean, do you guys agree with that? I mean, like, some home invasion films are successful and effective just based on exercise.
Well, I like Aggression
style.
Scale. I like Aggression Scale because what it does is that it flips the genre, and it's one of those movies that accepts that the genre is so well known that you then can take it and flip it, which is that the kid is more dangerous than the home invaders, which is sort of your next thing. I mean, it's so that's nice, and I enjoy that as an extra. I don't know if it's saying anything. I don't know if it has a larger theme. I mean, I guess we can go into like the real rah 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 bubba business of like, fuck you, we're America. You come here, we're gonna mess you up. I mean, maybe that's what it is, but it's fun to flip the genre on itself. I think it's a fun movie as a result.
I don't know, like to me, like, you know, what I especially like about Your Next is that it completely sort of raises expectations of female characters in movies like this. And, you know, for a movie at this point where we are so familiar with the idea of a sort of final girl or the idea of female victims, like to not do anything remotely interesting or multidimensional with a female character, to me, and to not acknowledge it in some way is just takes me too far out of the movie.
Well, I also think one of the components that makes Your Next succeed is the family. The family is so identifiable, for better or worse. And they do that without having a lot of like, hey, I'm a nice person moments. In fact, there aren't many of those at all in the movie. A lot of the family are kind of dicks. But you know, you recognize them enough to care about them. And I think it's a really interesting, you know, success with the film is that you have this family that comes in wholesale and you know exactly who they are, but it doesn't have to waste a lot of time setting them up and telling you why you need to care about them. You care about them because you recognize them.
I think, but you know what's funny is that the family in Your Next, you know what they remind me of the most? The family in the Father's Day segment of Creepshow.
Yes.
That's like, watching Your Next, I was like, were they watching Father's Day? Because it really is that whole feeling of like,
feel like that,
this
yeah.
like upper crust, fucked up family that's getting together, except they don't get killed by zombies.
Right.
I mean, that's the only big difference.
It's just a lot of fun too. I mean, I think that Your Next like adds an element of fun to home invasion that hasn't really been in there. It's typically a very dour subgenre.
Yeah.
And it's
Well, that's the weird thing about the marketing is that nobody would know this movie's really funny.
yeah, it's true.
It's like super funny
Yeah.
and like not like in like a making fun of it way, but in terms of characters, the characters are witty and interesting people who say funny things.
They need to have a
and
Swanberg-centric trailer, I think, for this movie.
Well, I think,
He's
I mean,
great. He's
but I think the problem with that is that, you know, what's the last like bona fide like horror comedy? Not that I even would consider this.
They tank.
They
Do
tank.
nothing
So
but tank.
it behooves them not to highlight that.
Yeah, no, I know.
But you know, like, I don't know. To me, I think there's just a clarity to the movie, and that's what actually makes it work for me. Is that like a clarity in terms of constructing characters that you understand, that the information is revealed, not in a like sort of such a piecemeal way that it becomes like meaningless or arbitrary, but just in a this is as much as you need to know at this point, but you will eventually know everything that you do.
Who do you think is best? Is it Barbara Crampton, I think, who is got so much emotion in this movie? Sharni Vincent, I think, who kicks a lot of ass, or AJ Bowen, who's so fat? Who is the best? Who is the best in this movie?
I think Crampton and Moran are great at grieving. You know, there's a lot of grief. I think you've mentioned this. I mean, there's a lot of grieving in the movie but it happens on the fly. They don't really take a breath to let it happen. But that's one of the things that grounds that family to me. You know,
Yeah.
I think Swanberg for me is.
He's really great. No, I
Yeah.
have obviously personal things with that guy, but he's
Yeah,
incredible
sure.
in this movie.
Yeah.
He's so good, and he plays a character who is kind of a douchebag up front, and then by the end of the movie, like, oh, I like that guy.
Yeah.
Oh, he's all right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which
Larry
is nice.
Fessenden did pretty good in this movie, I gotta say. Larry did a great job.
Gotta take a shower. We got to
yes,
credit
AJ,
Dwight Twilley also for
What's that?
bringing we've got to credit Dwight Twilley for bringing the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Some
Exactly. I might have to use that song.
I think Sharni is actually pretty great in the movie. There's never a moment where you're like, oh, she's just unrealistically not scared of what's going on, but her reaction seems very pragmatic in a very believable way. Again, because even though we don't sort of find out exactly why until later in the film, like you don't feel like it's a betrayal of like her character from the beginning of the
Right.
film.
Right, and her reactions are in the moment she is scared, but
Yes.
also taking care of business at the same time. So she doesn't turn into into the Terminator.
Yeah.
She's like freaked out,
Yeah.
but also knows how to put nails through a board and put it by the window. So she has both sides of that happening at the exact
I
same
think
time.
she has a great emotional beat towards the end. Of the
Yes.
movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on, guys. That wraps up this segment of Choice Cuts, the home invasion discussions. Thanks so much for coming on, and that's a wrap.